Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Built to Scale. And this is episode 2 of a two-part series with John Bencosme. Sorry, John, I am screwing that up. But for our audience that, we're not going to like super highly edit or filter this, that it's John Bencosme, that John has had a significant career as a construction CFO and is super passionate personally about ESOPs and does some ESOP advising as well with ESOP 1. And so we are diving into episode 2 here on the cons of ESOPs. And 45-minute episodes, you all do not do justice on the topic of ESOPs, but last episode was on the pros, so now we're going to dive into the cons. And as John recognized that everybody, we are recording this on the same day. We do not wear the same things 2 weeks apart, so that way everybody's aware that as they're viewing this, that we do record this on the same day. And it's nice too, right, that we can kind of get the thoughts on the board, that what are the pros and what are the cons, and we can collaborate from the last conversation. So John, just for a little refresher for people that may not have listened to the first episode on the pros of ESOPs, share a little bit of background about yourself, that, why are you passionate about ESOPs? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So, my background, you mentioned, was as a CFO, finance guy. Actually started my career in investment banking, but the last 15, 20 years in construction and real estate. So helping GCs of all sizes, from $1 million all the way to $500 million, general contractor, subcontractor, real estate development companies. And then about a decade ago, the company I was working for converted to an ESOP and got to go through the ESOP, and it's quite a journey here the last decade, going from this upstart ESOP through now and the other side of it, which is a mature ESOP. So I think it's kind of nice to be able to share. Last call we talked a lot about positives, but there are some negatives and some roadblocks that, if I could share at least some of them, because I think many of them are avoidable. So I think it'll be good to kind of walk through them and potentially, as we go through them, talk about, hey, here's what you could do to try to avoid it. Some things are not avoidable, but there are many that I think you can get ahead of.
I'm really interested to dive into this because for our audience, I kind of highlighted on the last episode that I also have experience of being inside an ESOP after an ESOP, has been implemented. Um, you know, I I I want to definitely take a neutral approach, that I've seen where, there can be challenges with an ESOP. Not necessarily the ESOP structure itself, but also an ESOP against, market-based challenges. And so just things you have to be prepared for, that these are market-based challenges that you would have had to face even without an ESOP, right? So I want to, try to remove some of my bias from this, but I just think that there's a lot of content and there's a lot of advice out there on the pros, but I just think it's really important for business owners to hear about the cons of it as well. It's not, the ESOP is not a new design. It's not a new entity. It's been around for some time, but it's just gained a lot of popularity. And I think alternatively, like if you look at like the private equity route, like if you sold to private equity, I think everybody's pretty familiar with like the cons of private equity. Like they kind of go in, with good eyes wide open, that this is like, as much as private equity is going to say that they do this and this and that, like this is really the truth of what's going to happen, that they're going to gut this, and they're going to look for cost savings, and they're going to be financial animals that are looking for the best ROI, right? Alternatively, I think there's a lot of information that has to come out about ESOPs, about what happens once you become an ESOP, and that how you can set up an ESOP correctly from the get-go. And so I'm interested, John, immediately, what are your first thoughts about what are the drawbacks of ESOPs versus alternative exit options for sellers?
Yeah, and I think, I'll start with kind of the cons that are unavoidable. They're just inherent with the structure of an ESOP. Number one, it's just expensive, and it will run the gamut. I'd be embarrassed to say what we spent for our transaction, 10 years ago, when when I'm talking to people spending, 8 figures. I'm sorry, 7 figures here for a transaction. They're talking about mega large companies. So I think that's the first piece. It's expensive. It's complex, especially we're talking, we're construction, we're builders. We're not necessarily the most financially savvy, so there's some complexity. You're talking about shares and equity and transactions and ownership structures, and you want to make a construction CFO think, try to go into that topic. So I think expensive, uh, somewhat complex because I don't think it's overly complex with the right advisor. Um, and it's an administrative it adds administrative burden. In our last call, we talked about the positive of you're not thinking about taxes anymore, which is great. But now you're dealing with you're a stock based company. You have to get a share price. So you're doing valuation. Now you're talking to lawyers more than you ever wanted to in your whole life. Now you've got your finance team's got a whole boatload of new requirements for the financial reporting. Your HR is managing a whole new benefit. You've got administrative costs. So, you've got an actual, in addition to your 401k, you've got now this thing called an ESOP that needs an administrator and administrative fees and bookkeeping. So I think those are uh, I think the inevitable negatives. There's just no way about it.
That's the key is, and I just for our audience, I mean, there's all different types of seller options, right? You can go with a strategic buyer, like a bigger company that might want yours. You can go with an outside private buyer that, would like to own your type of business that doesn't own, other businesses like yours and wants to own yours. You can go with a private equity, buyer that, wants to come in and, potentially use yours as a platform or a bolt on to another platform and, et cetera, et cetera. And then, there is ESOPs, and even that is too summarized. Like there are all types of options, but you brought up that there's a lot of admin cost. There's a lot of fees with setting up an ESOP, a lot of legal fees and all that. So it's not necessarily cheap to set one up. But then there's a lot of admin that has to go on after that. To go through, and I think this is the key point for our audience. You're going to have to go through an annual valuation every year, and to produce that valuation, that means you're going to have to get really good at budgeting, forecasting, and doing historical financial reporting. And there are a lot of businesses, like literally, I know, John, I've walked in, and talked with some prospects that are ESOPs, and I ask them, I say, so how are you managing cash flow? They say, we look at our cash balance. And I say, oh crap, that now I know why the ESOP trustee called us in, that you need way more than, my gut feel tells this, is going to be going right. And I think that's the part of this, is that you now have shareholders. You are now responsible to shareholders. And so, your reporting, your employees as shareholders, and I may be jumping the gun on where this conversation can go. For audience to be aware, they can sue you. Like there is an aspect to this that your employee shareholders could sue you, right? And there's a lot of nuance to that. I get it, but they could sue you. And so, I think understanding that, you do have to manage an entity, you have to manage shareholders and keep shareholders at peace and happy, just like, you would with a public company. But there's a lot of administration that goes in that if you weren't a organized company previously, you're going to have to become a lot more organized. And to do that, I have found, John, that usually that means you might even have to staff up, for some of that admin, that, you may not have had to do the level of financial reporting you've had to do in the past. You might need a team member or two that can help you do that going forward. And so there may be some overhead costs that you have to consider as a part of it. At least that's been my experience.
No, and that's a part of when I'm, working with folks in the transaction. I go, the model of the bookkeeper slash receptionist isn't going to work. It is you are, the requirements of exactly, you're now responsible to report numbers that you're responsible for because you're creating value. You're telling people your retirement's worth this much because the company's worth this much. So I think that's why groups like yours are great because they can achieve that much better diligence, get their existing team trained up, get the systems that they need. And that's what I was kind of running into has been great. And because now I can feel more confident when I see a company that's got a great business. And that tends to be the issue in construction. You've got a great business. You're awesome at building. And you always had the receptionist doing payroll and not realizing that can work only for a little bit. And if you're awesome at your job, you're going to grow. So you've got to start to shift and bring in people like your group. I think that can bring in the expertise without having to get the full cost, right? Not everyone's going to say, "I got to spend $250,000 just to have a CFO." No, now I can. There's resources out there now to get it. So, but no, you're reporting, and you won't even get through the transaction with crappy financials. It just won't happen. So you're gonna get forced to at the beginning, but I think for success on an ongoing basis, you're gonna definitely want to really get the financial aspect, and it's good for the business. And you care as a seller because you want to get paid. So you want to make sure the company is reporting well, budgeting well, planning for capital because almost all of your cash flow out is back to you as an owner. So I think it's all, to me, I think of it almost like forced maturity. It's gonna the ESOP is gonna force you to be, you're pretty much operating, not as rigorous as a public company, but you now have shares. And those shares, unlike the public company that has a market that people tell you what you're worth, you have to go through a private once a year annual valuation. To me, it's a real positive experience because you're getting an outside person judging your operation. And remember, you're hiring these people, and what they're doing typically is they're comparing you to another 100 HVAC subcontractors, concrete, and they'll be able to tell you you're not spending enough capital. Oh, your AR is taking too long. So I think it's kind of nice. And a lot of times in the construction world, it's very insular. Like no one knows the books, so you've never had someone tell you. Just kind of have said, "Oh, I need X every quarter," and if you're getting it, you're not even, you think you're doing awesome, not realizing. So I think that's the beauty of an outside eye, and kind of some of the services you provide is someone that could come in, might hurt your ego a little bit, but it's good pain to kind of be able to help you see, oh wow, I never thought about liquidity ratios or cash flow or excess working capital. What does that mean? I need a van. No, it's a little deeper than that. So I think, no, I think it forced, that's kind of another, again, I view it as a positive con, but it is going to force a higher level of sophistication. And I always say, to me, the math is, yeah, you could not spend that money, or you can go ahead and spend all this money on taxes. Right. So let's say I spend 100,000 upping the performance of my finance team or reporting, but I just save 500,000 in taxes. I take that trade any day.
I think just to even provide some tangibility to it that, for our audience, and this is my experience, you know, if you don't have to provide, and for construction companies, especially general contractors, usually you all are used to, you already have to get CPA reviewed or audited books to get surety bonding. If you're a sub, you may not be required to do that, to go get a line of credit with the bank or whatever. But um, when you think about it, that the bank will make a decision to loan you money to offer you a line of credit, whatever the case is, on the basis oftentimes that you might have some significant personal net worth that could be used as collateral, that your personal guarantee for that line of credit or whatever the case is, makes the bank feel comfortable and easy that they could go take collateral if they needed to. If you have now moved your company to an ESOP, your employee shareholders are not going to provide that personal guarantee. So you've lost the ability to get that personal guarantee. So from a bank financing standpoint, for them to continue to provide financing of some sort, that they're going to want to see some stringent financials. You're going to have to do it for valuation. I think, just to provide it tangibly, if you are not getting reviewed or audited financials today, yeah, you're going to have to get them. Like, I mean, it's almost a certainty that you're going to have to get them. And you're going to have to go through the valuation, which for that process, that means you're going to have to get really good at budgeting, and not just budgeting the next year. They're often going to be looking for a forecast for the next 5 to 6 years ahead. And you're going to have to get really good at explaining the variances between what happened and why, and what your budget says, because a lot of people would just throw out a budget and like, whatever. But you're actually going to have to get really good, because you are going to be interviewed during the valuation process, and you're going to have to explain, why do these variances exist? Because the valuation is going to be built upon some of those forecasts. And again, there's administrative load to this, that there are many beautiful things of this, but if you get your valuation wrong, that if you float numbers that are too high, that are unrealistic, and, then all of a sudden the valuation has to be course corrected. I mean, the one thing you want to avoid, at least, and I don't mean to get too legal on this, but like, you want to avoid throwing out these major forecasts that they build a valuation off of, and then they don't come true. And then you have to then go tell your employee shareholders why they may have taken a deduction on their total, on their total share price. Like, that is a very difficult conversation to have. And so what I'm saying is, like, there's all these little pieces, like you may have to go into audit and valuation, and you may need the financial resources to support it. But even for a business owner, like you said, there's a maturity piece to this, that you're going to be having to think in a way that you may have never thought before, that you've been managing your business from, your hip and being able to pull out a gun and you're good to go, you're going to have to be thinking multiple years ahead, and you're thinking about managing and keeping your employee shareholders happy, right? And it's a different mindset that you're going to have to step into. That it's not just, oh, I institute the ESOP and we're good now, but it's like, no, you now have people that you got to keep happy.
And honestly, the the magic, everyone's, oh, how do you make your share price grow? You're profitable and you grow the business. And to me, ultimately, that's what keeps employees happy. They like being in a part of a company that's growing, gives them more opportunities to advance, gives them a higher earning potential. So in my mind, there's this administrative burden. I think the sophistication brings a bunch of other positives. But at the end of the day, all you really do is you just have to run your company well, and the employees will be happy because their share price. You run a company well, you're profitable. You're paying off debt. You're earning cash. You're expanding the business. So I would say, not to worry too much about the keep employees happy. I think ideally you're thinking about how to keep them happy just because you want to keep them, especially in our industry where it's so hard to find people. I think we didn't even talk about this in the pro side of it. The beauty of an ESOP is you're going to pay employees what they're worth. If they can get $75,000 a year, they're going to get $75,000 a year for you or for somewhere else. The beauty of an ESOP is now you can say, hey, I'll get you the 75, but hey, here's this other thing. You got this thing called retirement you probably never thought about. We're taking care of that, and I think to me that keeps employees happy because they're going to get paid what they're worth in the market. The ESOP just adds this extra layer now. So again, to me, it makes the value of of increasing your financial maturity even better. Even though I think honestly it's neutral to be in an ESOP. You want to bring in that sophistication. I think what the ESOP does is forces you.
I want to be totally, transparent. I don't know what the resulting story from this trial or this case is that I want to be, and I joked about on the last call that I'm from California, which is generally a very employee liability driven state that is a very contiguous state. It's a very, for lack of a better way, a sue happy state. That there's just and so I've even heard of an example. Again, I don't know the result of this case or not, but a major company that about 20 minutes from where I grew up, that they went the ESOP route. The original founder owner exited by instituting and implementing ESOP. And then roughly about 7 to 8 years later, they did eventually sell to a private equity firm. And so that ESOP sold to a private equity firm. So all those, employees, shareholders got paid out as a result of, the value of what they sold to the private equity firm. Um, the employees though, they went and they formed a lawsuit against the original founder owner and basically said that the value that we got on the sale to private equity, it should have been greater because of the delta that we should have actually, the original valuation should have been lower when, the original owner exited, because we created all this value over the course of 7 to 8 years. Right. And like, again, I want to be a caveat to this. That's California, right? And I don't know what the resulting case is of that. I don't know, like that trial or that lawsuit is on. I think it's still ongoing. I don't know what resulted from it. That if at the end of the day the judge slams down and says no, that's invalid, then yeah, the ESOP is protected. But I think I'm just trying to give a little bit of flavor to our audience that, especially in particular employee contiguous states or heavy employee liability states. I just think it's a consideration that, yeah, you do now have employee shareholders. It's no longer a privately owned business. Like, you do have employee shareholders that you do answer to and that you have to be responsible for. And keeping them happy may be the wrong way to put it, but just understanding that, right? That yeah, if you do something that they sincerely disagree with, and dependent upon the ESOP trustee that's implemented, that is supposed to represent them, that I just, that might not go the way that you want to. And I think that has to be considered as a part of this. I haven't heard of too many stories like that, but it just feels like it's relevant.
There's quite a few of them out there, and I think that's probably another one of the cons on my list is you've got to be ready to have full integrity, or ESOP's not the way to go. It will come back to bite you. So in my mind, if you run your business with integrity, 100% on the up and up, again, doesn't mean you don't maximize your compensation, doesn't mean you don't maximize selling it, but you don't fudge the numbers, you don't play the shenanigans. I always joke and say, you got to get your cousin Susie off the company phone plan, and your 3 kids can't have company vehicles. You've got to run it as an up and up. So that usually is one of the pieces that again, that beautiful tax savings and that nice big payout in the long run comes at the cost of integrity, which again, to me, that's just another positive. Like, you don't operate with wondering, uh-oh, is that going to come out at some point? Or so-and-so gonna. So I would say 100% a con. If you're not wired that way, ESOP's not the right business for, and not the right structure for you, because I'm not so worried about the employees in the sense. It's more they've, the Department of Labor is now holding you accountable. But you're more scared of them than your typical employee. Most employees, they just want to come to work. You treat them well, you pay them fairly. So and again, if you want to have a successful operation, you're already doing that. Right. So to me, it's, if you're one of those meat grinder builders that just give two craps about your employees, you're just trying to get your biggest buck. ESOP's not the way to go. Just if that's working for you, keep going down that route. But I think that's another, I would say, a hit list of the cons is this, there's no wiggle room for. So I always kind of get your house in order, kind of prepare for the prom, get cleaned up, and you're going to be on the straight and narrow, because it's not worth it. You're going to do great as a seller. If you run an awesome business, you will be rewarded. It's not worth trying to squeeze a couple extra dimes that's going to expose you to exactly years of litigation. So in my mind, it's one of those cons that is easily corrected by just do things the right way. And so, and if you're not sure, that's why we have groups like ours. That's why, people have the ability to get a group like yours, pick up a phone and ask. Don't do it. If you're unsure, you're like, oh, is that? And I usually say, if it's enough that it's making you wonder, slow it down, get some advice. And there's so many people out there that could help you avoid hot water. But no, there's plenty of examples of it, unfortunately. I think part of it too is that the industry itself has learned there's been enough of these disasters, and now the attorneys and the advisors and all the people in the space will hopefully guide you. And I think that's, again, I kind of like the ability of being, and this is where being on the consulting side is great, because you can be honest. You're not dependent on them for your paycheck. So you could just be like, that's not on the up and up. You got to stop. Whereas sometimes internally, people are too scared. It's their paycheck. They're not going to raise a flag, and they're going to let you sink. I think, again, surrounding yourself with people that could give you good, constructive, honest feedback is huge.
Let's go into a little bit of philosophical debate here, because I have a sentiment about this, but let's walk through a scenario, because I've seen this, where a business owner generally goes to market, or at least gets some market feedback that, hey, like, I can't really go to market. Like, I don't have something that somebody else is going to buy, that, something about this business that maybe there's dependency upon me or something of that sort, that there's not an alternative buyer to this. And should they go down the route of an ESOP if there really is no alternative choice on the market? And especially with the intent that they're going ESOP to eventually get themselves out of the business, may not be immediate, but like really wants to get themselves out of business. Should they go ESOP? Why or why not?
It depends. Um, if you've got a business that can cash flow well, even if it's a short termer, like, why not get the tax advantage and get all that growth, all that equity inside of an ESOP, and you're not dealing with it until you're retired. And I think that would be the only pro. If you have a non-sellable, non-scalable, non like, you've got that kind of, and I've got the same thing where I've got a practice where, it's all right here. This is the business. It's not necessarily sellable, but the tax deferral and the tax savings made it worth it. And so, coming out of New York City, where it was 10% went to property tax, 4% went to corporate city tax, 9% personal, 9% state business tax, 40% federal. Like, that, just the math, to kind of cut those people off of my cash flow had made sense. So it would depend. I would say if there's someone on this call that's like, I would say let's have a conversation. Yeah, it's free advice. So they say it's about as much, was it worth as much as you paid for it? But I wouldn't say 100% no. But it had you'd have to have because think about just the startup cost is so significant. You've got to have either very significant tax or just you're generating so much profit that the tax savings on it would be worthwhile. But probably not. But I think worth to me it is never not worth a conversation.
I think the key thing is, yeah, it needs to be a conversation that it shouldn't be, I have no other option. ESOP default is what it is. And at least my opinion on it is just be cautious that, if you want to, if you, like we talked about in the pros episode, I feel like if you plan to continue to operate that business, but you're just trying to get some liquidity out of it and to create a tax management plan, and you're going to operate that business for the next 5 to 10 years and kind of create that plan to exit, yeah, all good. But I have caution in regards personally. If you go to market and nobody else, because you brought up like, hey, is it a good cash flowing business? Well, if it was a good cash flowing business, I would hope that you'd go to market and you get, somebody out there that'd be interested in that, right? That isn't dependent upon you as an owner, that, like you said, your brain power in there. But if you have a good business that is cash flowing that can service the debt, like without your heavy involvement, then I would hope that you'd be able to go to market. But I've just heard of situations where, I guess what I'm trying to highlight is just be careful about, it's the default, that if nothing else is available, it's the default. Cause I think, we talked about in the pros episode, at least my viewpoint is ESOPs are there's an altruistic, theory or a theme behind them. But if you go an ESOP and you don't have alternative options, it might say something about the quality of your business. And if you want to exit, you don't all of a sudden just like go hire a CEO replacement and they fix everything for you and everything's good. Like that doesn't work that well, actually. Like you're going to go through rounds of failure of and if that business is highly dependent upon you, like I be prepared for that business being highly dependent upon you. And when you exit, something may happen, right?
No, and it, and there's a minimum size as well. Like I think if you're under 9 to 10 employees, you're gonna have a hard time. I'm not sure the ESOP's the right structure. So no, I'd go very skeptical. And again, this is getting again advice of people that are going to be honest, because of course the person doing the transaction is going to say, yeah, let's do it. It's only a couple $100,000 to find out it won't work. Versus ideally, you're talking to groups, and most of the folks doing ESOP transactions are reputable. They'll tell you, yeah, you don't have the cash flow. This doesn't make sense. You don't have enough employees.
I think one big drawback that, um, I mean, at the end of the day, for our audience to understand the transaction of an ESOP, there has to be a buyer and a seller, and there has to be a financial transaction that happens somewhere in there. Your employees are not going to be the ones coming up with the dollars to pay you out. And so, usually the normal financing method of an ESOP is that you finance it internally. So, that can be done a variety of different ways, but you finance it internally with some debt. You use the ability of that business to produce operating cash flows that it can service debt. And ultimately, you can go get an outside bank to come and finance that transaction. You could do a seller's note, but usually involves some debt. Now, what's nice, you mentioned on the first conversation, John, like the the nice part about sellers notes is that you can adjust and flex with them, that if something happens to the business, it's not going to crush the business. But alternatively, if you have a business that gets valued at, say $20 million, you can theoretically put $20 million worth of debt on that business, and you now have $20 million of debt that you may have never, that business has never had that type of debt before. Um, Walk us through. I mean, that just seems like that's a massive risk in itself, right?
Well, you would think about it. The business you created this business, and an outside person says it's worth $10 million, right? And maybe it's typically 5 times cash flow. So that means you're cash flowing it as an operation. This independent person says you're a $10 million company. You're worth 10 million. You sold the company to the trust for 10 million. So now the, the company the company owes you 10 million. So that would have meant you're at least generating $2 million in cash flow. So now what's happening is it's the same exact company the day after the loan. You just have to be, again, and this gets into before the transaction, you've got to be confident in what you're selling. right? So if you were Zoom right in the middle of COVID and you sold at the peak, that was bad. All of a sudden, people come back to the office. Zoom stock not worth that much. So I think it's not for the immature business plan, right? And it could work the other way too. Like if you sell it to an ESOP. Well, actually, this will be one of the this is a potential con that I'm going to turn to a pro here. Is what if your company's worth 10 million now, but you think it's going to be worth 30? Why sell? Right? But I run it right? And that's gonna be some of the cons that you hear, but that's the other way to use warrants to your advantage. So now all of a sudden you've got a vehicle to get some monies on the loan, but now you're gonna, as long as you're staying there to ride out that growth, now you're getting rewarded in the warrant. So you get that upside. So I think if there's doubts about the cash flow of your business, you're probably not ready for an ESOP. But if you're confident, and it's, like I said, the pro of seller finance and staying on to run the business is your business. I can generate 2 million, and you've been doing it as long as you've owned the company, right? If you're in stable, and typically construction is pretty stable, you don't tend to be this massive growth unless you're expanding into new markets. But then again, that's expansion. So that's all in the plus. So I think it's just that is being conservative on the sale, being sure about cash flow before you do it. And, ideally, again, if you have good advisors, and that's kind of what, you say, and again, if it gets back into the integrity. If you're pushing to maximize this payment, all you're doing is hurting yourself and the company versus being, hey, no, I really am an $8 million company. Then get it 8. Or if you're not sure, do it on warrants. So now you've got skin in the game, and you'll get the reward if you deliver versus burdening the company with too much debt. So I think, again, just an honest conversation, good advisors just goes is the best way to go, and you avoid that con.
I love the point that you put because the conservative like valuation, like I mean, like that's the piece of this that yeah, you have to feel confident in your business, but I've also seen or I've been part of when they're putting together the valuation and for like this is my practical sense of even being a business owner and you've been an advisor and business owner, like I don't know of a single business that has had linear growth where I mean every year is a perfect year. Um, I've seen a lot of businesses where you go through cycles, and a lot of even my background, even outside of construction, has been within food and ag businesses where I kind of have rule of thumb, and food and ag businesses. This isn't necessarily perfect; it's arbitrary, but you're going to have one mediocre year. You're going to have an absolute terrible, like terrible year, and then you're going to have a great year, and the compounded annual growth rate of all that's going to be 5%. But as you're walking through that, it will be terrible as you walk through it. But the compounded annual growth rate is going to be 5%. But when they're walking you through, like as you're going to exit and they're walking you through the debt service calculations, you'll see, like, I'll see advisors that they'll just be like, oh, well, it's just perpetual growth. Like last year you did that great and that was such a great year. Like, why couldn't you pull that off? Like, why couldn't you pull off that 10% growth next year and the next year and perpetually? And it's that's where I think that just some healthy pushback that, too, I've also seen advisors that I'm not saying you do this, John, by all means. I'm just, some advisors are, they're compensated based upon the total valuation too, right? And so, understanding what people's incentives are too, that they may be wanting to drive up the valuation, but you may feel fully confident about your business, but just because they're trying to push valuation up to be 20 million, you may feel like, I would feel a lot more comfortable with 15 and I'd feel a lot more comfortable with the debt service on 15. That's okay. Like, it's okay to do that. Like, you haven't lost anything on the table. If anything, you are providing some surety that all is well. And, but on the other hand, if you truly feel that confident, go for it. But I think a lot has to do with the level of confidence that it can't be artificial. Understand who's at the table and who's advising you and what their incentives are. But I think to that point, like, start with something conservative. Like, don't shoot for the moon as a part of this too. That, it just that can be a little bit dangerous, that knowing that businesses will go through slump cycles and that's okay. And that, do you feel confident with that debt service plan that you're instituting? Even with warrants and et cetera, do you feel confident in that debt service plan that if you could be on the low end of that cycle, that could happen, and because it's just very rare that a business grows in perpetuity every year for the next 10 to 15 years, like stuff happens. And I've been on and that's why I want to be careful about my bias in this too, right? That I've been a part of an ESOP where the trailing 12 months up to the transaction were the best on record. The next 24 months were the worst on record. Um, and so we had a fixed debt service that, well, at the end of year 10, if you show perpetual growth, that debt service looks really great, that you got plenty of EBITDA and free cash flows to service that debt. But in year 1 or 2, we're pretty tight. And it just so happened the market the good Lord rained on all the crops. And I mean, put it like it hurt badly, right? Alternatively, I know where that business is at, and they would be able to service that debt now. It'd be no problem. Like they got through it. But the post 24 months, oh, it was so hard. Like it was so hard. And I think just making sure that you're analyzing that right.
And again, part of it too is that the pressure's not on you. It's really your and this is where again the quality advisor makes all the world of a difference because they're supposed to hire an independent trustee who hires their own valuation company. And then really when I'm talking to clients and we're looking at valuation, I always say, have they valued how many companies in your industry have they valued? And if they've, oh, I've never done an agribusiness, then you're not the right firm because a reputable valuation company is going to say, no, give me the last 10 years. And or they're already going to know, oh, you're in XYZ. Yeah, that's the cycle every 5 years. And then what they're doing in the valuation, they're adding in a risk rate to that cash flow projection. So you could do this, but a reputable valuation companies go, that's not reality. It's really going to be this, right? Right. Okay, so let's map, and they'll come back to you and adjust, or they'll just slap on a giant risk rate because they know your numbers aren't realistic. And that usually, again, this is where surrounding yourself reputable advisors, honest advisors, and I always kind of that gut check. If you feel like they're trying to pull a fast one on you, they're rushing you through the process. They're probably not the right people. You want to feel confident. You want to make sure you're doing the right thing for employees. You also want to do the right thing for yourself because it's a pain in the neck. And I've had a couple of these clients that did that. They did the transaction off of the record year, and it's come back to bite them and the morale so it's just not worth it. And I think there's so many opportunities to get it on the upside that if you're in one of these non-predictable cyclical businesses, I think a heavier focus on warrants is going to be better for you and for the company. But again, ideally, the advisors that know the type of business you're in, and that you feel like they're not just there for the fee, they're there for your success, I think is going to be huge.
So John, yeah, I like I said, at the beginning, we could go on and on about, ESOPs and all the things to consider. I think we've covered quite a bit here. What would you, what do you feel like we may have missed here that you want to make sure our audience walks away with, that from your experience being in them, advising them, what should they know of just, hey, and it's not, I think to our audience, it's not saying no to ESOPs. Like I even myself, like I'm a fan of like the altruistic idea. Like by all means, if I had to choose between ESOP versus private equity, objectively for our audience, ESOP all day. I just think it's important to understand what you're walking into, right? And just, eyes wide open to this. And so what would you say as a takeaway, John, for our audience, that what are the kind of the final key points that you'd love for them to know?
I would say, being informed. I like the way we did this where if you didn't get a chance to hear the last episode on the pros, make sure you measure the pros against the cons. You vet through the concerns, the things that you don't think are, that you're unsure of, and just be sure, are they fixable? Is it a con that's just the nature of it? Because then if it's a con, is the trade-off of cash flow worth it? And as a person been in this for the last decade, I've yet to find a scenario where it didn't work for a good business that's doing well, cash flowing well, strong management team. I think it's a home run, but you didn't win me over to the dark side. I'm still pro ESOP. You failed. You failed.
Cool. Well, thank you, John. Just appreciate your practical experience in this matter, and that we could go, pros and cons on this, right? That yeah, that we were able to get both sides of this. And so much appreciate your advice in this, and that for our audience, that I should have done this on the first episode, but for our audience, that really would love to chat more about ESOPs and understand more, especially from the construction background, given your level of experience. How can they reach out to you? What would you be willing to share with them that if they need to get in touch with you?
I think, yeah, go on our website, ESOP, the word ESOP one, the ONE.com, and take reach out to us on the site. We'll get back with you, and like I said, we'll love to give you some guidance. Give you at least our thoughts, and if there's a value add that we could bring as a service, we will. But otherwise, love talking ESOPs, and welcome the inquiries.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you, John. So appreciate your time, brother.
Thanks.
All right. See you, everybody. Until next time. Hi, everyone. So if you enjoyed today's episode and you found value, or it raised some questions for you about the next best steps for managing your finances in your construction business, please reach out to us at bradycfo.com. There's a contact page there where you can fill out, and that will come straight over to us. Either that, or you can personally find me on LinkedIn. My name is Mason Brady, and feel free to send me a message, and happy to chat and talk through anything you're facing today, and happy to provide some advice. So thank you all. Appreciate it.